Welcome to Boroughs Burbs with hosts John Engel and Roberto Cabrera. Over the next hour, you're going to learn some insider knowledge that will help you overcome and strategize in the cutthroat world of real estate. Now, here are your hosts, John and Roberto.
Welcome, everybody. Episode 98. Can you believe it? 98, 3 years of Boroughs and Burbs. And this is destined to be the greatest of them all.
Oh, yeah.
This is
Indeed.
We're here doing Long Island City we've got 3 experts in the house. I've already learned that Long Island City has been the next big thing for 100 years. And I'm dying to find out why. But first, let me introduce my sponsor, Grace Farms, a nonprofit organization close to our hearts, located in New Canaan, Connecticut, of course. They're home to Design for Freedom, an initiative focused on ending forced labor in the building materials used for our homes, offices, and public spaces. So join us, support Grace Farms and this noble cause by enjoying Grace Farms' exceptional coffees and teas, knowing that 100% of profits go to Design for Freedom. Use promo code BURBS, of course, at sharegracefarms.com for a 10% discount on your first order. Join us today and be part of something greater. And with that, let me introduce my special guests from left to right, according to me. Miles Chapin of Brown Harris Stevens, John Stark, also of Brown Harris Stevens, and Nicholas Lounsbury of Douglas Elliman, who are my experts in Long Island City. I also have my co-host, Roberto Cabrera. Say hi.
Hello, everybody from the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
And where are you, Roberto?
I'm on the Upper West Side. I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
World
you
headquarters.
Want to give my address? You like what? You always trying to expose my location.
But it's so beautiful and it's so
nice
hip,
windows.
and it's why people think they want to be in Manhattan. But if they can't be in Manhattan, they want to be in Long Island City.
That's right.
Nicholas, I'm going to start with you because this show is your idea. When I said, can we do a show this week on, can we do a show on this week? You said it should be on Long Island City. Why?
Well, thanks for having me, and glad that I got to meet you at lunch. But I think Long Island City, for the past couple years has been growing really well. I mean, you have amazing train infrastructure. There's 7 trains. You have a great neighborhood. You have a better way of life, in my opinion, than a lot of Manhattan. You have all new buildings. And, from my experience, you have a lot of people that work in Midtown. And if you work in Midtown, you probably don't want to live in Midtown, and you can get to Midtown from LIC in about the exact same amount of time for less money, for a newer apartment, and a better way of life. So that's why I think it's so great. That's why I think it's been performing so well. And that's why I think there's still a lot of room to grow.
All right, I heard a couple things. I heard new development and I heard affordability and yet convenient. So Miles, John, dive in. Don't stand on ceremony here. Dive in and interrupt when,
I think the affordability is kind of getting out of it. In terms of luxury, new development, it's definitely still there on a per square foot basis. But I moved out to Long Island City 30 years ago, and it was extremely inexpensive. And it has gone up since then. It's not what I would term right now a value neighborhood, except for new development. But you get the ambiance is really worth it. I mean, it's become a community of its own. It's a destination now. And when 30 years ago when I came here, it was definitely not that. There were packs of wild dogs roaming around at night. Yeah. There were no street lights, and it's really, really changed a lot. And for the better. The development has really been good for the neighborhood.
But I do think you get more bang for your buck still in Long Island City, wouldn't you say, Miles? Just because you could have a budget of 1.3 million in Manhattan and you could get a 2-bedroom there, but you're not going to get what you get in Long Island City. You're going to get a 24-hour doorman in Long Island City. You're going to get a washer dryer in your unit. You've made it. You have a washer dryer in your unit. You're going to get amenities. You're going to, is everything's going to be brand new. So I do
That's
think
precisely it. Yeah. Yeah. No, for that segment of the market. But I mean, I live in an 1880s townhouse on a landmark block, and there's few and far between, and the prices for those are very low compared to other such neighborhoods like Brooklyn Heights and the West Village. But for the developments, for the new development, the luxury market, absolutely, it's still a bargain. I mean, we're now up to like $1,400 a square foot for new development, which is still, I mean, you can pay 5 times that much in Manhattan.
it's true.
And
How much of your inventory is new development?
Ooh.
I would say, I mean, almost the majority of it. There is still a resale market here for sure. And if you really want to get a better deal, that's where it's at. You know, you are going to be paying, you know, people will pay a lot more for brand new, right? So there's nothing like brand new. There's nothing like being the first to live there. So people pay a premium for that. But you know, the real value, of course, is the resales. And I would say, I don't know, Miles, what would you say percentage wise? Maybe 20%?
I was gonna reverse it and say 80% new stuff. Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, right. 80% in things that have been built since 2001 when they did the rezoning. But also, there's a lot of investors out here. There's a lot of high-rise condos that are foreign owners that are being rented. So it's a very, very active market. Resales, rentals, it just churns. I mean, every time I have a listing in this neighborhood, it just astonishes me. Who's coming out and the activity, the amount of volume, the traffic is just remarkable.
So
Does that also mean that the majority of your marketplace is actually condominiums as opposed to co-ops?
Definitely.
Without a doubt.
It's a wonderful thing.
Thank
No,
God.
there are certain areas in Queens that are driven by co-ops, such as Jackson Heights, parts of Flushing, like that. But all the new development, everything that's been built since 2000 is all condo. Well,
can you
Are there any
orient
pre-war
us?
buildings?
Use it.
Sorry, John, hold on.
Wait, okay.
Hold on, just 1 second. I'm sorry. And you're taking my role because that's usually what I want to do is see where we are. But I want to ask, are there any say Park Avenue type buildings, you know, Central Park West type pre-war buildings that have doormans or anywhere in that
It's
location?
more like a warehouse. So pre-war, yeah, you're going to get that, but it's more like it's a warehouse. We're talking about Long Island City here, where that's the history, right? So we have a place called
Sure.
like Air Softs. It's a condo. It's gorgeous. It's stunning. You have 20-foot ceilings. You have a 24-hour doorman. It's just not going to be that same kind of feel. It's got this really cool, you know, background of what it used to be, you know, warehouse wise, and now what it is. So
yeah, there was a repurposed Engel electrical manufacturing facility. I went through it 3 times and we're building it. I mean, I love repurposed buildings, and that was just a spectacular project. And a lot of real estate professionals live in that building. But for the kind of Park Avenue co-ops, Roberto, that you're mentioning, no, we don't, because here's the key: Queens is not fancy. Queens was never built fancy. Okay, there was no downtown Queens, unlike downtown Brooklyn. Okay, so we never got that merchant class. I mean, the Hunters Point Historic District where I live is about as fancy as it gets, and these are, you know, 3-4 story townhouses on 100-foot lots, and they're very, very nice. But it's just not built fancy. You know, now some of these places are fancy because they've been rebuilt, but the kind of co-op buildings that we're talking about, maybe there's a part-time doorman. Aris Lofts that Jonna mentions has 24/7 doormen, but that's a repurposed, relatively new condo. In fact, that was one of the first condo projects that opened here. But if you go out to Jackson Heights, places like that in Queens, there are some buildings that have doormen, but it's nothing as fancy as the fancy parts of Manhattan, for sure.
But
So-
if you're talking about new condos, now we're getting fancy. You know, Long Island City is like the Beverly Hills of Queens, and you know, the buildings that are coming in now, the condos, you know, they are getting nicer and nicer, and you know, amenities are, you know, indoor swimming pool, and you know, all the little like luxuries that you could think of that Manhattan had. You know, it's all coming to Long Island City as well in the new condos.
Yeah,
John, you realize you're going to have to elbow your way in here.
and a lot of craft beer too.
Yes.
Love
So
that.
where am I when I'm in Manhattan and I look over Roosevelt Island at the Pepsi sign? I look across the East River. That's that's what most of us think of as Long Island City. And now I'm looking at the map and I'm realizing it's very small. It's that area just north of Brooklyn, but it's south of Astoria, Queens, and it's really only goes up to the first half of Roosevelt Island. Is that right? Or are you going to consider Long Island City the entire area?
You're talking about Hunters Point proper, which is really like Vernon Boulevard to the west, to the waterfront. What would you say, Nicholas and Miles, like from 45th, maybe 46th to Borden Avenue? That's like Hunters Point proper. But Long Island City is actually pretty big, and it does go all the way up into Astoria.
Politically speaking, and as a political entity, Long Island City is almost the entire part of Western Queens. But since people in our profession have moved in here and started working, it's broken down into submarkets. Dutch Kills, Vernon Jackson, we got all kinds of neighborhoods. I live in Court Square, Queensboro Plaza. These are all sub neighborhoods, but it's pretty big in terms of Manhattan size. I mean, it's not the size of the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, but it's bigger than Chelsea. It's bigger than the Village. But politically speaking, it goes all the way up to Astoria and all the way up to where to the airport, pretty much. Yeah, I mean Ditmar, Steinway up there. That's considered Long Island City politically speaking.
Okay. So everything between LaGuardia Airport and the city, all of that's Long Island City.
Along the waterfront, yeah. Because if you see on this map here, you got Woodside, Jackson Heights. You see, there was no, well, to quote Gertrude Stein, there was no there when the boroughs amalgamated into New York City in the 1890s, okay? Queens was farmland. So they put a railroad line, the number 7 line, that goes basically straight out to City Field where the Mets play. And of course, the developers would buy up large tracts of lands and lay out their own grid. My great-grandfather was one of those guys up on the northern part of Astoria. He did that, and he laid out a grid, named the streets after his family, after his kids, and after his brothers and sisters. But there was no locus. There was no downtown Queens. So it's kind of grid that meets other grids. It's kind of higgledy-piggledy that way. So I hate to give a roundabout answer, but that's really the truth.
So where is all this new construction being located? Against the river or throughout?
So there's less space on the river to do that now. So we're seeing a lot more of the new developments happening in Court Square and Queensboro Plaza, where there's still a lot of room to grow. I mean, the waterfront there's still space on the waterfront, I think, but and we will see more and more come up. But right now, a lot of the new developments are Court Square, Queensboro Plaza.
Yeah, that's where I heard it described as a barbell today, which means that in terms of the zoning, high rises were allowed along the waterfront and they were allowed in Court Square and not in between. So in between, we have a lot of new projects, but they're only 6-8 stories high. The real high rises, I mean, I'm looking out my window, I look at, the biggest building in Queens is right, around the corner from where I live. It's the first $1 billion project in Queens called Skyline Tower, and that's in the Court Square area. So you got this barbell with the tall buildings on the river, Court Square, and not so much in between. But the tall buildings are moving up now. They're moving up into Dutch Kills, into areas like that.
It's true.
It all depends where
we see those geographics. John, can you go closer on that map just so we can understand exactly those spots that they're talking about?
Yeah, so where I can't find this Court Square.
Well, is that working? Is my little arrow working here?
No.
Okay.
So let's see.
You're in Sunnyside. You gotta go a little. Yeah.
You see where MoMA PS1 is? Okay, you can see the Court Square subway stop. But if you look where it says Hunters Point, and this is Court Square, 23rd Street, and you see PS1, MoMA PS1, it's kind of in that area right there.
It's over to the left of where you are. Now up a little bit. There you go.
There, yeah.
Yeah, that's Court Square. And that's I mean, I live on that block, right by the 1 block away from that little park you can see there. There are 4 subway lines, to answer the question in the chat. There's the M, the E, the 7, and the G. the G train, which goes to Brooklyn, terminates right here at Court Square. That's the end of it. It used to go out farther into Queens, but they pulled that back a couple of years ago. So you've got all those. Then you've got the old BMT lines, the R and the W. Those are more to the north because they come over the 59th Street Bridge.
So you're basically essentially 1 to 3 stops away from Manhattan. I mean, a lot of Long Island City is literally 1 subway stop to Manhattan. So in terms of convenience, you really can't beat it. When I moved to Long Island City, my biggest complaint when I moved here is that all my friends would show up too early because they're like, oh, well, I thought it would take so much longer. You live in Queens. And what they didn't realize is you're literally 1 subway stop from Manhattan. You cannot find a more convenient neighborhood than Long Island City. And on top of the trains, we also have 2 ferries right on the waterfront, which go to Astoria, go to Manhattan, go to various stops in Brooklyn, go to downtown Manhattan. So, it's pretty amazing. And then, you can walk, you can bike, you can drive, or you can take the G train to Brooklyn as well. So kind of living in Long Island City, you're almost able to explore all of New York City a bit more because because of the location. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's Queensboro Plaza right there. That's where the 59th Street Bridge comes in. No, I've lived in New York my entire life, and this is far and away the most convenient neighborhood I've ever lived in. I can be in any part of Manhattan, the Upper West Side, like Columbia University, it's 35, 40 minutes, depends when the trains are there. I once made it from 181st Street to my front door in 40 minutes. It was just remarkable because all the trains, just boom, 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 they were all there. And then you get that view too, which every Law and Order episode these days, has a scene with that view in the back.
That's
So it looks
because
like the favorite
what's his name lives in LIC now. I think he lives in City Lights, right? The Elliot character, what's his name?
Stabler?
Yeah, Detective Stabler. I think he lives in City Lights. Anyway, whatever. Side note.
So talking about transportation, do you guys have the same issue that Brooklyn has, where everything runs essentially east west or west east, vice versa, but going north south within the borough is actually quite difficult? Like, to get from the bottom part of Long Island City to the northern part, is that difficult?
Not really.
Transportation wise?
No, because there's a spur on the old BMT line. The N and the R go straight up to Astoria. I mean, the food marketing, we never even started on that. I mean, I go up there almost every weekend to all the Greek fish markets and the bakeries, and it's amazing. And I just changed trains once and it's right there. And I go from the end of my block. It's very easy, homemade pasta shops. I mean, it's remarkable. And then we have the G train that goes south to Brooklyn. But the thing is, Queens is huge. Physically it's the biggest borough, and as such, it's a little underserved, because once you get out into the other parts of Queens that lie between where we are in Long Island City and Flushing, there's all those other neighborhoods, and they're served basically by 1 or 2 trains. So, and also one thing that John didn't mention is the Revel scooters, those little electric scooters that you can use with an app. I use those all the time out here. It's great. Go to Costco, go there on a scooter and then get a Uber for the way back when you've got your toilet paper that's the size of your house. It's great.
So Nick, when I said, what are we going to do an episode on? You said Long Island City. It's the next big thing. And I just have to make fun, right, by calling your attention to this New York magazine cover from 1980, where they called Long Island City the next hot neighborhood. It's just 5 minutes from Midtown. And you know what? In 43 years, it's still 5 minutes from Midtown.
I was right. 40 years later. I wasn't born yet, but I was right.
Yeah. No, that photograph, that's the Hunters Point Historic District block, which Time Out magazine called it the 3rd nicest block in the whole city. And it's very beautiful. They didn't have the tall trees when they built all the houses, but the trees are very nice now. No, that's a very long article that details all these super pie in the sky projects, most of which never got built. But I think that article might have been what tipped me to it back in 1980, because I always paid attention to this neighborhood. Yeah, fascinating.
A lot more skyscrapers now.
I guess, yeah. Well, for years there was only one. There was the Citicorp building, which is no longer the Citicorp building. And they built that because when they built their headquarters on 53rd Street in Lexington, the building that has the slanted top like that,
yeah.
this was their back office, and it's one subway stop away. It's the E train, one stop to their back office, skyscraper. And it's amazing, the convenience. But then again, it was sort of like everybody standing around the pond waiting for somebody to jump in first. I mean, it's really been highly speculative for years, and it wasn't until the zoning change in 2001 that was really the tipping point. Because I've been living here since before that time, and there was one project called City Lights. John had mentioned it earlier. That was on the waterfront, and there was a City Core Tower, and then that was it. And then when that zoning change happened, it allowed high rises, and then the big boys came to town: Rock Rose, Browse, TF Cornerstone, Silverstein. And now they're all here, and a lot of those guys have kind of moved on. The Dursts have a big project up in Astoria. A lot of them have moved on because they've sort of priced out of buildable square footage here, and they're going to the South Bronx and places like that. So it's just, it's pure economics. I mean, when I got here, I think a buildable square foot was about $30 or $40 a buildable square foot. And now it's up to what, John, $300 a buildable square foot for a lot that you can build? Yeah. I mean, it's in that neighborhood. It's that order of magnitude. It's amazing. Yeah.
So for Nick and I, who just only discovered Long Island City recently, I discovered it in 2018 when Amazon was thinking about moving there. And Nick said, no, it's hot now because Amazon didn't come. So why, Nick? Why are you excited about Long Island City?
Well, I think obviously at the time, Amazon was a big deal, but like Amazon's not the only company that is out there in New York City. And as much of a newsworthy event it was, like, I think it was just a lot of noise. Now, like, you look at obviously you had COVID, but since then, the amount of development that's gone on there is insane. I mean, you look at all of the waterfront, which is primarily rental buildings. They're just popping up every 2 seconds. The Durst building, that was referenced, that is a monster 600 or 800 unit rental building. Rock Rose and TF Cornerstone continue to build more of these buildings. And it just goes back to, like, you have brand new product, you have a young demographic that makes very good money. Like, I just rented a 2-bedroom apartment for $5,000 and the couple makes $750,000 a year. So like, that renter that lives in LIC for 2 to 3 years, they become the next buyer of a 2-bedroom condo. And, that's been what's happening over the past 5-10 years. And, these guys can speak better to it than I can because they know the neighborhood better. But just in my experience in the past couple of years, pricing continues to go up. More buildings continue to be built. The transportation is just as strong. And like, it is arguably the best point to get into Manhattan. And like, if you want to buy a new development condo in Midtown, it's north of $2,000 a foot. If you want to get a new condo in LIC, it's $1,400 to $1,600 a foot and a better quality of life. So like, the taxes too, like, you can't, not just a price per square foot, but when you think about what the monthlies are and the difference in that over the course of 5-10 years, it's a crazy number. And that's why you're just continuing to see people move out there.
Did you just say
a lot of the buildings are built with 421As too, so there's tax abatements on them.
Yeah.
They were stimulating, the city was wanted to stimulate growth here.
Did you just say
Nick.
25% discount to Manhattan? Is that fair? I mean, did I hear 2,000 becomes 1,600?
Yeah. I mean, to
Nick,
be
can I
fair,
ask you a
those
question
units
about the
aren't
couple?
selling. Like, those units in Midtown aren't selling, but the units in LIC, they are selling. Like, you have new development projects in LIC right now that aren't even going to market and they're nearly sold out.
I have a colleague who just called me. He was so upset. His buyer offered full ask on a new development. And then you have your hand raised. Do you want me to do?
Yes, I have a question. I want to ask Nick about this couple he rented to. Nick, so I'm just curious, this couple that you rented to, first of all, where were they living prior? Were they there or were they in Manhattan?
They were in Manhattan. I think they were in the East Village.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So they're going to rent for $5,000 a month for 2 years or whatever, 3 years, 4 years. Are there plans that once that period comes back do you think they'll stay or do you think they're going to come back to Manhattan?
I mean, I think maybe some people do, but I think if you look at like the data of the progression of people that move out to LIC, like the numbers of people that stay versus go into Manhattan are way higher because like it's a better quality of
People fall
life.
in love
That's
with
expensive,
LIC.
and it's new. Like you get new product for the price of co-op product in some
So
instances.
you guys are seeing a lot of people come from Manhattan for sure. And
sure.
I'm sure you're
And
seeing
Brooklyn.
a lot of people from around the country who are coming to New York for the first time that really can't afford Manhattan or maybe Brooklyn, and they go to Long Island City because it's more affordable. And then they end up staying and that becomes their home. Are you also getting people that live in Queens, like deeper into Queens, that are like, they're moving up to Long Island City? And that's kind of a goal.
I find it's usually people from Long Island who like, maybe they have become empty nesters and they have literally a 5,000 square foot house on Long Island. And they're just like, we don't need this anymore. And we want to be closer to the city and we want to see shows. And, you know, actually our daughter lives in Manhattan, you know, or our son lives in Brooklyn. So they sell their house and they come to Long Island City, you know? So, I mean, people further in Queens also definitely, definitely come to Long Island City when you know, when they can afford to buy here for sure. But definitely see people from Long Island as well.
I think you see a lot of people, like a lot of families, in my experience over the past like 1 to 2 years, a lot of families that live in Queens, they're helping buy apartments for their children and they want to live in LIC. So the parents, they want to be close by to their kids. They know it's a good investment. A lot of time it's a cash buyer. So I think you see a lot of that too.
Totally. And I think that where couples who they're like, yeah, we're going to test out Long Island City. We're going to, you know, rent for a few years. This is why I continue to do rentals, because those renters come back to me a couple of years later and say, hey, we want to buy now. Can you help us buy? You know, because something about Long Island City, it is like you said, there's that convenience factor, but the quality of living here is really nice. And when they get to a point where they want to raise a family, I mean, the waterfront's beautiful. You have a lot of nice parks. I mean, it's just a really lovely spot to be for sure. And you're, again, once we stopped Manhattan, so you can't really beat that.
We've got to mention the parks, because that area along the waterfront that Nick was referring to and saying, and they're still building a lot of buildings, the master plan, because that's like city-owned land, and a lot of it, some of it is owned by the MTA. There's a master plan for it that hasn't been fully built out yet. So they're still, you know, bidding on projects and putting up buildings out there. But there's the most, in my humble opinion, the most magnificent park in New York City along the Long Island City waterfront. It's
fully agree.
No, it's full of native plants. It's built to withstand storm surges. You can take a boat to it. I mean, I had a listing in Lower Manhattan last summer, and I would, you know, do my open houses. I'd get on the boat. I'd have a beer. I'd get off at Long Island City, at, you know, south, you know, and the sun was set, and I'd get there. It's the most diverse place on earth. It's just so mellow. And I'd get on a little scooter, and I'd be in my house in 5 minutes later. I mean, it's just you can't beat that. And
And there's something to note about our waterfront on Long Island City. When you're on our waterfront in Long Island City, you're only a couple blocks from the subway. When you're on the waterfront, say in Williamsburg, in Williamsburg on the waterfront, you are really far from the subway. So again, I hate to sound like a real estate agent, but location. No. Just the location of how Long Island City is built in the waterfront. It's just, it really, I agree with you, Miles. I think we have the nicest waterfront of any waterfront neighborhood in New York City.
It's astonishing. It's really like public work well done. But also you mentioned that Williamsburg, because a lot of those high rises on the Williamsburg and Greenpoint waterfront, when they started selling, they had to have shuttle buses that would take you to the local subway. You know, you don't need that here.
It's true.
I got to tell you, we've been doing this a long time, and I don't know that many people that have been as effusive about where they live as you guys. Like we can't get you guys to be quiet.
I will say, when we first started doing real estate, in Long Island City years ago, you had to explain to people how great Long Island City was, and why it's such a good neighborhood. And so maybe that's just always in me now. But now when I'm selling, it's generally speaking, someone has a friend who lives here, someone has a family member who lives here. They've come to Long Island City many times to visit their friends, so they all know how great it is. So maybe, we don't really have to sell it really anymore because it sells itself.
My cliche is,
and I'm only asking
Overbuilt.
Is it being overbuilt at all? I'm only asking because each one of you have said, and every other day, there's another building going up. There's another building going up. There's another building going up. Like, can the infrastructure?
The absorption rate is pretty good here. It's amazing because a lot of the apartments are being purchased by investors and then going directly onto the rental market. And also during COVID, we did not get whacked that much. We got whacked on the rental side, but not so much on the sales side. I mean, of course, there was a dip. I mean, I got the figures here if you want them. I mean, it was a dip from like 400 down, 415 plans approved in 2019, down to 200 in 2020 and 248 last year. But it seems to be absorbed. I mean, that's the key.
And when you say it's being built up, it's just when you compare it to, say, Manhattan and Brooklyn. I mean, we have the space, we have the room for it. We are the wild east of real estate. Here in New York City, I would say Queens is. So we have the capacity to build, like Miles said. I think. Yeah,
my joke used to be Queens, not just on the way to the airport. Schools are okay, although when my kids are like almost 30 now, and we were kind of, I don't know about the schools, and there was a brand new school in the ground level of the first high rise along the waterfront, and my daughter, who's 29, would have been in the first class at that school, but we got a variance and put them in District 2 on the west side of Manhattan. But the schools, there's a lot of new schools. I mean, that's what comes with the families moving in. They can't build more schools than they have demand for, so there's a bit of a lag. I can't address that. If you had a school age kid next September, if they're going to get in the school nearest your house, but I can tell you that the school construction authority, which is located about 2 blocks away, is building madly.
And
so
I would say, okay,
I found an interesting graph, and I'm going to show it with you, and I think it partly explains maybe why Amazon thought that Long Island City was going to be the next opportunity. This is a graph that shows from 2010 to 2018 the probability of your being able to buy a property for $2 million, and you see that it's very dark, high probability all over in Midtown Manhattan and in Brooklyn and in Queens. But as we move through to 2014, 15, 16, 17, you see that Manhattan starts to become very light, but Long Island City is still a deal by 2018. It's still a deal. It's the only neighborhood left, along with, say, the Midtown, Turtle Bay, East Midtown, and Murray Hill, Kips Bay. Those are the only Manhattan neighborhoods where there's a high probability of buying for $2 million. And then there's a Hunters Point, Sunnyside. You see that it's one of the last ones. So I think Amazon, looking at this, has studied the graphs, and they're saying, this is the last opportunity we have for affordable housing. What you're saying is, despite the fact that Amazon didn't come, others looked at the same kind of graph and said, this is the last good opportunity to develop in greater New York. Is that about right?
Yeah, like Nick said, I think, even though Amazon didn't come, because they wanted to be here, other people still wanted to be here then. That people took note. As they say, what is it? No exposure is bad exposure. No news is bad news. Like, we got that exposure whether they came or not. And then it really put us on the map it put us in the world map, really, that people were aware of Long Island City and what it was and what the potential was there, I think.
Yeah, you have to understand the history of the development of this area was not so much residential as it was industrial. And as such, there were still some large parcels of formerly industrial areas that was available to Amazon, some large footprints that they could buy from one owner rather than having to skulk around and, collect a lot of small parcels and put them together. So there's a company called Plaxol, and they do vacuum formed plastics. They were one of the pioneers in that. And it's a family owned company. And that was the core of the Amazon deal. And then they were going to pick up at the same time the City Core building, which is at the end of my block, which was the only skyscraper, and it was ready to have people move in right away. So it really fulfilled the promise, because the zoning change in 2000 that really was the tipping point for all of this. This is supposed to be a mixed use, industrial and residential. It's kind of tipped over towards the residential more and more. But the thing about the Amazon that appealed to me mostly was that Amazon really wanted to be good neighbors.
What
And
was
they
the basis for the opposition? Why did the Cortez and others resist development? It seems to me that they said what it's going to do is ruin neighborhoods and it's going to make Queens unaffordable. But
No,
I
it
think
wasn't.
that change occurred, you're saying, with the zoning change long before. The
Yeah.
horse was already out of the barn on that.
Yeah, and it wasn't AOC as much as a guy up in Astoria named Michael Ganaris. And they were playing to the crowd. They were grandstanding because it's always, getting up and boo, we hate real estate, capital R, capital E. All the real estate interests, all the rich people are going to come in here. They didn't really, the plan didn't have a chance to seep down. I mean, it was a very organic plan. I mean, I used to chair the Rebney Queens Committee, and John and I were talking about this the other day. We had the Plaxall people came in and they did their dog and pony show when they put that property on the market. We were the first people, the Queens Committee, that they made their pitch to. And then they went to Amazon, and then they came back to the Queens Committee when they did the Amazon deal, and they made a big presentation about what it was going to be like. And that was Valentine's Day, and that was the same day that Amazon pulled the plug. It was unbelievable. It was just amazing. But they was
Valentine's Day I ever experienced. We'll never forget that it was on Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the resistance of affordability was because I'm assuming the majority of this housing stock there is rental. Like, for example, in Manhattan, 70% of the housing stock is rental. Is it the same in Queens?
Yeah. But the new construction is tilting it, is changing that statistic. But yes, definitely. And a lot of NYCHA housing out here too. Huge NYCHA. I mean, the Queensboro houses, the Ravenswood houses, these are some of the largest public.
Explain that.
Well, that's NYCHA is New York City Housing Authority, and that's public housing. And it's a real problem in New York. I mean, you could do hours and hours on it, but we have the largest public housing. I think it's in the country. The Queensboro houses right nearby here, and it was us versus them, and it was a class thing. And I think there was a lot of political grandstanding going on because big real estate interest is a big fat target. It's really easy to throw darts at them, but you got to live somewhere, right? I mean, we got a housing crisis, and these are the guys that build, So it all kind of comes to roost here. It has, and so what happens on the ground isn't necessarily any pre-plan, except for the plan for the waterfront that I was mentioning before, because it has to do with economic forces and capitalism. I mean, you're dealing with the most rapacious late stage capitalism that you got in residential real estate in New York City. So you got all these forces. I mean, Amazon would have been a game changer because it would have given people living in the neighborhood and working in the neighborhood. It would have created a lot of jobs. Because as Nick said, there are industries here still. JetBlue is one that has a building over in Queensboro Plaza, but a lot of the people use this neighborhood as a bedroom. And a lot of the people, you stand in the lobby of some of these rental buildings and these sharp-elbowed people paying no attention, just put the blinders on, get on the subway, go to their jobs in the financial district, come home, get the food delivered to their front door, and they don't get their shoes repaired, get their hair cut, get a sandwich locally. But that's what the Amazon people, that was part of their whole appeal was building neighborhoods. Unlike a company like Disney, which has all kinds of cafeterias and salad bars and, cereal bars, Amazon was really, in Seattle, they put the grid, they bought a big warehouse for their headquarters and they put the grid back. The warehouse that they bought had obliterated a street grid in South Seattle and they put it back. This was the stuff that the Plaxall people were telling us about the project. But things like that never got out. It never got to the public because, rich people are going to take over the neighborhood, rah, rah, rah. It was sort of like, I'm a child of the 60s and it pushed a lot of those buttons, Too bad.
Give me some more of these anecdotes about who's moving in, how much are they spending, where are they coming from, why? I mean, for instance, is it Generation X or is it the millennials coming in because they're beginning to have kids, they need more space, they thought there was it's convenient, good value alternative, although I'm now hearing maybe it's no longer the value play. but it's still convenient and I get more space than I would in Manhattan. So is it being driven by millennial demand only? And are they displacing the baby boomers?
I think we have a wide variety of people. It's very, very diverse in Long Island City. I think that Long Island City is a compromise for a lot of couples who maybe have ties to Manhattan and Long Island or Brooklyn. Maybe one of them works on Long Island, one of them works in Manhattan. So they just say like, this was our middle ground. Like, this is where it works for both of us. In terms of, generations and time, age, I think it is a good variety. Like I said, I do think, you do have those people who, are empty nesters who just kind of want to be closer to the city again, now that their kids are gone and they don't need a big house anymore. But you certainly do have the younger generation, millennials who, are ready to have a family and just want a little bit more neighborhoodly feel for sure.
Yeah, it always gets compared to Brooklyn, and there's a certain gritty authenticity to Long Island City that you don't have that kind of arch coyness. This is not a Wes Anderson neighborhood. I mean, this is for real here. And some people appeal, like that. I mean, my kids grew up in Long Island City, but they both live in Brooklyn now because they want, all the cute little, $12 avocado toasts, which is fine. I mean, that's great. That's great stuff. But here it's like it's a little bit grittier and a little bit you're closer to more middle and working class people because Queens as a borough is very homogenous. You don't have extremes of wealth or poverty. But another thing we haven't mentioned is it's much more automobile friendly than Manhattan. And a lot of people here, like Jonna mentioned, this model where it's a couple where one of them maybe works out on the island, one of them works in Manhattan. They can keep a car. She can drive out to the office in Hoopage or wherever it is, and he can get on the subway and go down to Wall Street. I mean, I find a lot of those compromises. And a lot of my clients, maybe it's because of my age, are those kinds of people, and it's NYU professors to, two income couples. And it's a real compromise because you look at a map, you're in the middle of everything. And the public infrastructure, public transportation infrastructure is right there. So it's
how much is parking?
Like $400 a month in Long Island City, would you say? $400 a month, which, in Manhattan, I think the cheapest you're going to find is $600, and probably quite a bit.
I park an SUV in Lincoln Center, under Lincoln Center for $569.
Is that grandfathered?
Okay, that's pretty good.
I think that's a deal.
Really
Yeah,
that's a deal. That's a really good deal.
That's a deal.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, but I live on a block that has 0 parking regulations. I mean, there is no alternate side of the street parking. My car is right out in front of my house and it's been there for 4 or 5 days. That's the upside. The downside, which people that just moved to this neighborhood don't understand, is that means we have to keep the streets clean or else the city's going to come in and go, okay, now we're going to put these regulations in. It's funny. Very funny. It took me about a year to figure that out, to cop to that. It's like, oh my God. And so we get a lot of people that come into the neighborhood and park during the day. I had an anecdote, John. I sold a house down the block, and the family. It was actually a record for a townhouse sale for a couple of months. They had a restaurant on the west side of Manhattan called Good Enough to Eat, which had been there. It's a Columbus Avenue, wonderful restaurant. And kids were getting older, and they wanted to move to Connecticut, and they would use their car every morning. And they had an arrangement with somebody who came in from Long Island who would sit outside their house and wait for them to take the kids to school. And every day they'd come out at 8:15 or whatever it was, and they'd get in the car, and then this guy would park his car in that spot, and then the reverse at the other end of the day. And it was like this unspoken agreement between them, and they sort of held the parking place for one another. It was
amazing.
Brilliant.
Look, and I would also argue that we still do have value in Long Island City. I don't think that that's not there. Yes, the neighborhood's hot. Yes, the price. Look, I listed a 2-bedroom for $5,000, and it we had offers up to $5,400. So yes, a lot of our rentals are going for higher than what we listed for. But again, you compare, you look in areas in Brooklyn or Manhattan, and you just still are getting so much more. So yeah, it's not inexpensive. It's not cheap here. Long Island City is expensive, but it, when you think of the grand scheme of everything, right? But in terms of when you compare it to Manhattan and Brooklyn, it's still a really good deal. It really is.
But I think
can we talk about the townhouses, Miles, because you live in a townhouse? Can we talk about the townhouses? Because Brooklyn is heavy on townhouses, lots and lots of townhouses. They tend to be smaller than what you find in Manhattan. Yeah. And I would imagine in Queens, maybe even a little bit smaller. So describe for me a townhouse that might be on the market now. What's the size of it? What's, it's the width? What's how many floors? What's the price? What's the taxes?
Sure. Well, on my block, which is the Hunters Point historic block, it's all 100-foot deep lots. 18 feet wide to 20 feet wide. Most of the houses are built under their FAR. So if you want to do the really good job, you can open it up, but you have to push out the back of the house because it's a landmark district. You can't really pop up. But the taxes are insane. Insanely low. They range on my block from a low of about $6,000 or $7,000 a year to a high of about $15,000 a year annually. Yeah, and the prices, I've had the record for townhouse sales on this block twice. My favorite story is I sold one that 2008, we sold it for $800,000. Now, this was a wreck. This was Silence of the Lambs, this place. This place was open. It had feral animals walking around. The sewer pipes had huge cracks in it. It was really a scary, scary place. But I sold it to a guy who bought it sight unseen, a guy who used to live in the neighborhood. And a Swiss guy, he was a commodities trader. And he used to live in this neighborhood when he went to Columbia. And he bought it literally sight unseen. His daughter saw the sign. He called me up on a Sunday afternoon. He did a complete renovation, pushed out the back, built it out maximum, made 2 duplexes, full HVAC systems. The guy was Swiss. Swiss people don't mess around. They do things, the cuckoo clock. Remember this. Long story short, he sold it in a 1031 exchange for $4 million. So $800,000 to $4 million in 3 years. That's pretty good. I don't think you're going to get that kind of capital appreciation today. But it's all about the condition, because a lot of people they can't stomach doing work.
But that was a $4 million house back in 2012.
Yeah. No, a little bit later than that.
What would that house sell for
today? Oh, well, I wanted to sell that house. I would say if it's in still that good shape, we'd get, what do you think, John, a 5? Did we go over 5 for that house?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Do you have an address for me? I'll look it up.
Pretty remarkable.
That's I think it's 2118 45th Avenue. Yeah, and the thing is, I was going to sell it. The guy was going through a divorce, and then one of my neighbors sold a property and bought it just off market on a 1031 exchange. So that 1031 exchange, he paid $4 million, and that was never on the open market. I'm convinced I could have gotten more for it at that time.
So if I'm priced out of Brooklyn and I'm looking for a townhouse and I say, I'm going to go to Long Island City and see what I can find, where do I need to be price wise? Is this a typical house right here? This is beautiful.
That's right across the street from where I live. Yeah. And then that house,
over
yeah,
2 million.
That one right in the middle that has the little Ukrainian flag that's the one that I'm talking about. I sold that for $800,000 and he fixed it up and got $4 million for it a couple of years later. Yeah. But the thing,
so let's just say that house was not. Let's say that house was not completely. Let's say that house was a single family house, but it needed renovation. Right. But it was in. You could move in, but you're probably going to spend $400,000 or $500,000 or $1 million on it. What would that house sell for?
Well, the last one I sold, I got 2.4 for it, and it was livable. But the thing is, you're a real estate agent. If it's something needs work, somebody will come in and just beat you over the head with, oh, it's going to cost so much money. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. But the thing is, a good agent will prepare 2 sets of numbers. Here it is on a per square foot basis, and here it is if you fully build it out. And the thing is, the last townhouse I sold on this block, even at the biggest numbers and budgeting $200 a square foot for renovations, you were still on a per square foot basis under what something at Skyline Tower was asking. And you can have a garden and you own real estate, but people have to do the work. And a lot of people just don't have the stomach. So this sort of leitmotif we're talking about new construction, that's really what it is. People love new stuff, and there's lots of new stuff here because it's just toothbrush time. You just unlock the door, go in there, and you're in. Bring your bag and your toothbrush. That's it.
And taxes are so much lower on townhouses than you would pay for.
Yeah, no, it's absurd. The townhouse taxes are just.
Yeah. And I would say in Long Island City, I mean, townhouses are few and far between. I mean, they really are a hot commodity because there's just not a lot of them at all. It's
They're
not
very,
like
very rare.
downtown Brooklyn where you have all these wonderful neighborhoods with all these beautiful townhouses every block. We have just a few blocks really in Long Island City, where there are townhouses. So they will always, retain and remain valuable, I think.
And a lot of the houses also might have been nice once, but they were covered with vinyl siding and they were gutted inside and had Home Depot renovations in the 60s and the 70s. But it's interesting to try to get bank loans out here because you got to have a very careful appraiser because you just can't take a 2-family house on that block that we just looked at. You can't use a 2-family house in Maspeth as a comp for that. I mean, I did one sale that was a record breaker where we had to get 3 appraisals. And finally, I had to get the guy to come to, they wanted to do it by remote control. They all wanted to do it from their desktop. Oh no, I got Google. I don't need to go see the property. And I had to spoon feed him all the comps and tell him about that sale, that $800,000 to $4 million sale. But that's what our job is. We get the deal done. That's how it is. That's where we are.
They are a little bit harder, for the appraisal because there's just not a lot of comps usually at any given time. And then they start putting comps from other neighborhoods not far from Long Island City because they're really only a couple miles away. So you would think, oh, they're good comps, but they're not Long Island City. And so it really does skew the appraisal sometimes. So when people are buying townhouses, it is helpful if they can put more than 20% down.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I just sold one that was deeper into the heart of Queens, and we were getting 2 kinds of people to come and look at it. We were getting the local people, the Queens people, who were just shocked at how much money we were asking for this house because it was beautifully renovated and had a garage and the whole thing. And then we get the people, the refugees from Manhattan, that would come in and go, oh my God, this is so cheap. I can't believe it. But let me walk around the neighborhood and see what it's like. And there it's like, well, there's really not a lot of neighborhoods. I mean, you got everything that you need, but it's not like walking on the Upper West Side. You don't have 3 or 4 different dry cleaners within 5 blocks. You've got 1, maybe 2. You've got 1 liquor and wine store, and that's next to the subway entrance. So it's a bit of an adjustment for the customers. Yeah.
All right,
But
we got a few minutes left. We got a
Yeah.
few minutes left. I want you to all start thinking about making a bold prediction. I want to see some crystal balls. I also want to introduce Bushra. You're in the Long Island City. You're a realtor. How long have you been selling in Long Island City, Bushra?
I have been selling in since 6 years.
6 years?
Yes.
Any changes?
Well, I'll tell you what, I moved to New York City with my daughter 11 years ago. And the only buildings were there were like 4 or 5 buildings. And I was staying, I know Miles and Jonna will know that it's in Avalon South. My apartment was overlooking Manhattan. I could see Times Square from my window. And by the time I left, that was like a couple of years ago, the building started rising up and it was like a tsunami of building coming up. So the change is rapid.
And did you lose your view?
No, I did not. It was a perpetual view because we were overlooking the park. And I think for the first year when I stayed in Long Island City, I didn't even go anywhere because the park itself and the events, and we didn't need to go to Manhattan, although it was like the next subway station was Grand Central and it was very easy commute.
Why are you in Long Island City? Why are you in Long Island City?
Long Island City is I feel it's a hub, as an international hub, if you may say. It connects Manhattan, it connects Queens.
Okay.
You are in the heart of everything. You can take the train and go to Met Willits and you can enjoy a baseball game or the US Open tennis, or you can take the subway and go to Grand Central. and or you go to the city. You are connected everywhere. There's nothing like it.
All right, we're
It's
down to
such a
2
huge-
minutes, one and a half, 2 minutes. I need some bold predictions. Where is Long Island City headed?
Prices are going up, but there's going to be more development in other parts of Long Island City towards Astoria. My last deal we did in Dutch Kills, beautiful building. Prices are still lower there. People that are value driven will find what they want out here in Queens. I mean, it's just it's established now. It's an established neighborhood. Prices going up, but this is the
Donna?
Park Avenue. This part's Park Avenue.
I'm starting to get multiple bids on sales listings of mine. So my bold prediction and I guess hope is that I do believe the market is actually shifting. I think we may be in for a very, very busy fall. I think buyers are really getting serious about like, they're not waiting. They want to buy now. They're going to buy, they're going to date the rate, marry the home. They're going to refinance later if the interest rates go down. But at this point, they just don't want to wait anymore. So we're definitely seeing more buyers. So busy fall.
Nick?
The Mets are gonna win.
Good luck.
As bold as it gets.
That is as bold as it gets, really. How
I
about the fire
think,
sale?
I have been consistently busy there. The buyers are there. I think the hardest thing right now is inventory. And I just did an off-market deal at Center Boulevard on a 3-bedroom that my people were through the moon to find. So I think LIC is going to stay busy. It's staying busy. It's busier than Manhattan, and pricing is just going to keep going up.
Nick, you could make an entire career just finding housing for the Mets as they guys come in and then they go out.
I know,
And
it'd
then
be
they
a
come in.
turn and burn.
Player, property listing of mine just a few months ago. So the Mets players are in our neighborhood for sure.
Nick, how much was the 3-bedroom?
2.6.
You
And
can't
when they-
spend a lot of money out here. You can't spend. I think the record is like $5 million for this monster place with 3 terraces. You know,
I sold Kirsten and my boss Kirsten and we sold that one. It's at Eris Lofts.
Yeah.
2,700 square feet with over 2,000 square feet of outdoor space, and we got 4.8, which was the most expensive sale in the neighborhood.
Yep.
Awesome.
Wow.
I think that's a wrap. Thank you all for coming. This was a really, really good show.
Yeah.
A lot of content. Roberto, what do we got next week? Kips Bay?
Yes. I don't remember.
We're going to Kips Bay to see the show house. Sergio Mercado
That's it.
designed the show house.
Jonathan
You
Stein.
interviewed him. Jonathan Stein sold it. We're going to find all out about show houses and the design
He
world
sold it.
next week.
He sold it.
Yes,
Wow.
I think so. We'll find out.
Jonathan Stein.
Hope so.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
All right,
everybody.
guys. Thank you so much. Really
Bye.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having us.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
Take care.